The world had just emerged from World War II when a new line of tension was drawn on the map. The 38th parallel. Invisible to the human eye, yet loaded with meaning. That mark split a country into two antagonistic halves that ultimately clashed, giving rise to the Korean War. To the north, a communist regime backed by Moscow. To the south, a fragile republic sustained by Washington. Two governments, two armies, two worldviews, separated by only a few kilometers and by a distrust that grew day by day. But at dawn on June 25, 1950, everything changed. North Korean troops broke the silence and crossed the line with tanks, artillery, and a clear objective: to reunify the peninsula by force. Thus began the Korean War, and with it came the brutal intervention of the United States, which, under the umbrella of the United Nations and driven by fear of communism spreading across Asia, sent more than 1.5 million soldiers into battle. In this episode, we explore the strategic contribution, the human cost, and the savage consequences left by American participation in the bloodiest conflict in Korea's history. The people of South Korea were sleeping peacefully that early morning of June 25th, when, suddenly, the skies seemed to split open. From the north, thousands of North Korean soldiers crossed the 38th parallel like an avalanche. Soviet tanks rolled down the roads, crushing improvised defenses. Within hours, border cities fell. Within days, northern troops were advancing with ferocity towards Seoul. There was no declaration of war, only fire and a blitzkrieg that caught a young, poor, disorganized republic off guard. North Korea, politically and militarily backed by the Soviet Union, sought reunification by force. For communist leader Kim Il-sung, the time had come to consummate revolution across the entire peninsula. However, the South was not alone. In Washington, alarms rang immediately. For President Harry Truman, this was not simply a conflict between two Asian countries. It was the first major challenge to the global order after World War II, and a direct threat to the doctrine of containing communism that guided U.S. foreign policy. If South Korea fell, how many other countries would follow? The United Nations Security Council met within hours. The resolution was clear. North Korea had acted as the aggressor. The international community, led by the Americans, had to respond. Thus began the U.S. intervention in the name of peace, freedom, and the defense of the free world. Yet what followed was far bloodier and more controversial. A brutal war marked by dark, lethal episodes.
We have determined, however, that U.S. soldiers killed or injured an unconfirmed number of Korean refugees in the last week of July of 1950 during a withdrawal under pressure in the vicinity of No-Gun-Ri.
The No-Gun-Ri massacre. The first weeks of the war were absolute chaos. South Korea retreated without respite, devastated by the North Korean advance. Lines blurred, maps changed daily, and enemy faces did not always wear uniforms. Among the thousands of refugees fleeing the north, the U.S. Army believed it saw ghosts, disguised infiltrators, undercover saboteurs, spies hidden among mothers and children. In that climate of paranoia and distrust, on July 26, 1950, one of the war's most atrocious tragedies unfolded. Near the village of No-Gun-Ri in central South Korea, between 300 and 400 civilians sought refuge from the fighting. Most were women, elderly people, and children evacuated by soldiers of the U.S. 7th Cavalry Regiment, who then directed them to a railway viaduct to wait there. What followed was a storm of fire.
That at least they believed that there were orders that pertained to this. There is clear evidence that in some other units, not the 2nd or the 7th, that there were orders to stop the flow of refugees and so on.
American soldiers opened up with machine guns and rifles on the civilians sheltering under the bridge. For 3 days, bullets sliced the air between the concrete pillars while hundreds of people remained trapped, with no way out and no hope of rescue. Some testimonies speak of airstrikes, others of soldiers shooting those who tried to run. Fear of infiltrators turned into a massacre. It is estimated that amid that savage frenzy, around 400 people were killed. Declassified documents decades later acknowledged civilian deaths, but the exact numbers remain shrouded in shadow, buried in incomplete records and contradictory accounts.
Soldiers were not aiming at innocent civilians for the purpose of killing innocent civilians. What they perceived was a threat to themselves.
For years, this episode was buried. No one in the Pentagon spoke of No Gun Rye. There were no headlines, no public reports, no official inquiries. Only in the late 1990s, when Associated Press journalists revealed military documents and interviews with veterans, did the world learn the full story. The news shook public opinion in both the United States and South Korea, and Washington ordered a formal investigation. The official report, published in 2001, admitted that U.S. soldiers had killed civilians at No Gun Rye, but avoided calling it a massacre. There were no convictions and no individual accountability. The official version cited confusion, the fog of combat, and fear of enemy infiltration. A supposed verbal order to shoot suspected civilians was mentioned, though no written record ever surfaced. The truth was lost in the shadows of war.
I'm not saying they're right. If there was nothing there and they just arbitrarily cut down civilians, they were wrong. Please keep in mind, the 7th Cavalry Regiment has a history which is damn near unparalleled. It's a fantastic regiment. It's my home. They raised me. And I'm very proud of it. I'm very proud of what they did in 3 wars and make no apologies for it. That sums it up.
For many South Koreans, the wound remained open for decades. For the victims, there was no justice, only a monument, an ambiguous apology, and the weight of an unbearable memory. Nor was No Gun Rye an isolated incident. It reflected a conflict in which moral boundaries dissolved, where the enemy could hide among the innocent, and where fear and pressure turned young soldiers into unwilling executioners. Even so, despite the controversies of a war without limits, the United States had come to Korea to defend freedom and, amid death, delivered key contributions to the resistance.
On September 15, 1950, General of the Army and Commander-in-Chief of the United Nations Forces, Douglas MacArthur, launched a surprise amphibious attack against the Communist North Korean Army at the Bay of Inchon in South Korea. The move was risky. Inchon was heavily fortified, and American soldiers would face towering cliffs on its beaches. His maneuver caught the enemy completely by surprise. MacArthur quickly cut the North Korean army in half.
The Battle of Inchon. By September 1950, the war seemed lost. South Korean and American forces clung to the southeastern tip of the peninsula, cornered within what was known as the Pusan Perimeter. The North Korean advance had been relentless. In just 2 months, they had seized almost all rival territory. It seemed only a matter of time before the red flag flew over the last corner of South Korea. Nevertheless, in Tokyo, General Douglas MacArthur was planning a daring move, a counterstroke as bold as it was unpredictable. Inchon lay on the west coast, far behind enemy lines, and an amphibious landing there would be no easy feat. The port had extreme tides of up to 30 feet, narrow channels, coastal defenses, and dense urban terrain that complicated any maneuver. Despite the near unanimous advice against the operation, MacArthur insisted. Only a shock of surprise, he believed, could break the siege and turn the war's tide.
Aerial reconnaissance had established that supplies and reinforcements for the enemy were being funneled along two main highways through Seoul, southeastward to the Busan perimeter. After estimating the situation and considering several possible plans of maneuver, General MacArthur decided to make an amphibious attack behind the enemy lines at the transportation and communication hub which centered around Seoul.
On September 15th, 1950, the operation began. More than 75,000 troops, mostly from the U.S. X-Corps, and 260 warships surged toward Inchon and came ashore under lighter fire than expected. The surprise was total. Confident in their southern drive and deceived by MacArthur's feint, the North Koreans had left the city poorly defended.
To confuse the enemy, bombardments were directed at other coastal cities. By this time, the ships of Task Force 77, a United Nations armada, had left Japan with its cargo of 10th Corps troops and was nearing the west coast of Korea.
UN troops landed heavily armed because the tides meant reinforcements would take hours to arrive. They had to be ready for anything. To their surprise, the plan worked even better than expected. Roughly 400 soldiers from North Korea's 18th Division defended the area, but aerial and naval bombardment, along with ground fire, kept resistance minimal. In less than 48 hours, Inchon fell under UN control.
Communist troops, in a state of shock, surrendered after only light opposition. By the morning of 16 September, Inchon had been taken against light resistance. While the 1st Korean Marine Regiment cleared the city, the United States 1st Marine Division started toward the Han River, and beyond it, the former South Korean capital of Seoul, which lay about 20 miles from the Inchon beachhead.
The offensive was a success. On September 28th, just 13 days after the landing, U.S. forces liberated Seoul. The communists, now squeezed from north and south, began a chaotic retreat. A war of resistance shifted into a war of pursuit. The balance had changed. The numbers speak for themselves. North Korean forces likely suffered between 10,000 and 14,000 casualties during the operation, including dead, wounded, and prisoners. UN forces incurred about 2,500 casualties. It was a clear victory, tactically and psychologically. The Battle of Inchon remains one of modern warfare's most brilliant maneuvers. Its success rested on surprise, logistical precision, and the audacity of a general who staked everything on a high-risk move.
In an address to a joint session of Congress, General Douglas MacArthur uttered those famous words, "Old soldiers never die, they just fade away," and then added,
I now close my military career. Just fade away.
By late November 1950, the war seemed near its end. After Inchon's triumph and the recapture of Seoul, UN forces led by the United States crossed the 38th parallel with a new mission: reunify Korea under a pro-Western government. The Yalu River, the border with China, drew closer by the day. In Washington and Tokyo, the word victory echoed with growing confidence. But a shadow loomed to the north. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir. The People's Republic of China, newly consolidated under Mao Zedong's leadership, would not tolerate enemy troops on its frontier. In secret, it mobilized an army few expected: the People's Volunteer Army. More than 300,000 hardened soldiers, experts in mountain warfare, determined to change the course of the conflict. In the frozen mountains of northeastern Korea, near the Chosin Reservoir, roughly 30,000 American, British, and South Korean troops were spread thin, unaware they were walking into a trap. Hidden by snow and night, over 120,000 Chinese fighters prepared to strike. On the night of November 27, 1950, Chinese bugles shattered the silence, and a human wave surged forward. In relentless waves, with temperatures plunging to 35 degrees below zero, the People's Army encircled UN forces. The numerical advantage was overwhelming. Communications went dead, ammunition froze, weapons failed in the cold. Thus began the Battle of Chosin Reservoir, one of the fiercest, most desperate struggles in U.S. military history. For more than 2 weeks, the Marines held on, enduring ambushes, constant fire, and night attacks across mountainous, ice-bitten ground. U.S. forces executed an orderly withdrawal. It was no rout but a fighting march south toward the port of Hungnam. Every hill taken and every step gained came at a terrible price. The numbers are chilling. UN forces suffered more than 17,000 casualties, including dead, wounded, missing, and severe frostbite. Chinese losses were even higher. Estimates range from 40,000 to 60,000, many felled by combat, extreme cold, and lack of supplies. Even so, the Americans achieved the impossible. They broke the Chinese encirclement and evacuated by sea nearly 100,000 troops, civilians, and wounded from Hungnam. It was a legendary retreat. U.S. Navy ships slipped away loaded to the rails, leaving a devastated North Korea behind, but saving thousands of lives. Chosin ended without victory and without defeat. It was a brutal test of endurance, organization, and courage. In U.S. military memory, it remains one of the armed forces' most heroic episodes. For China, it confirmed a newfound ability to stand up to Western power. For Korea, it was yet another chapter of suffering in a war without winners.
Enemy detected! Just be this one man out there. Let's burn these rats out. Copy that!
U.S. participation in the Korean War unfolded in a strangely ghostly frame. War was never formally declared, yet millions of soldiers deployed. Bloody battles raged and scars formed that endure to this day. It was an intervention draped in the UN flag, driven by fear of communism and a desire to contain its spread. In the end, there were no parades, no victory treaties, no clear winner, only thousands dead, a society left confused, and the bitter lesson that even the world's mightiest military cannot impose peace by force of arms. On July 27, 1953, the Panmunjom Armistice was signed, sealing a ceasefire that ended the fighting, but not the war. Technically, North Korea and South Korea remain in conflict, separated by a tense military demarcation line. More than 70 years have passed since the last shots, yet the wounds remain open, the armies remain on alert, and the Korean Peninsula is still one of the planet's most volatile hotspots. The Korean War did not end, it was simply frozen in time. And that brings us to the end. If you enjoyed this video, share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you in our next episode as we continue exploring military history.